Hello and welcome to Vintage Video Riding the Rivers. I'm David Mossner. Sit right back and you'll take a ride on the Rock River, Missouri River, and a canoe trip down the Niobrara. We started in Fort Atkinson, where for a brief time in the 1980s, you could catch a ride on a passenger boat.
For Jim Furley, quietly steering his boat down the Rock River fulfills a lifelong dream.
I grew up on the Rock River and fished and boated and did everything on the river all of my life. And yeah, I've always wanted to get more involved with water activity.
This idea was born 7 years ago when Furley read about touring boats in Wisconsin.
I said, why not the Rock River and Lake Koshkonong? And I've been researching the business ever since.
Furley's boat, the Chief Blackhawk, started operating in June. It's a replica of paddle wheelers that last sailed in the late 1800s.
A lot of them were pleasure craft, and others were Uncle Sam was a 150 passenger stern wheeler that used to run trips from downtown Fort Atkinson to a restaurant on the lake.
100 years ago, those rides cost a nickel. A ride on Furley's boat today is $6.75 for a 2-hour trip. The ride down the river to Lake Koshkonong and back runs through popular camping and fishing spots. Furley hopes tourists along the river and other local folks will make it possible for his weekend excursion and charter service to expand. He's hoping his paddle wheeler will be on the Rock River a long time. Dave Mossner, WISC News 3, Fort Atkinson.
From the Rock River in Jefferson County, Wisconsin, we fly west now to South Dakota, where a boat called the Missouri Trader is about to leave its dock in Chamberlain.
Before the trains came to the prairies, the workhorse of travel was the riverboat, carrying pioneers and supplies into South Dakota from the river city of Yankton, north to Pierre and on into Montana. Before South Dakota became a state in 1889, Yankton was an early seat of government because that was where the boat stopped to trade or drop off or pick up passengers. In 1804, the explorers Lewis and Clark took a boat trip into the prairie, riding the Missouri as far as they could go. 1986 is a long way from 1804. Interstate highways, airplanes, and overnight package services have made the riverboat as a passenger-carrying service obsolete.
At least 70 years that a Coast Guard licensed vessel has carried passengers from Chamberlain down to Platte and back. So in that sense, it's kind of a historic voyage as well. I was doing a study on transporting grain, and as a result of doing that study, I was interested in river traffic. I've got some good friends that are in the tourist business, and I guess I use a lot of their ideas and some of the very basic transportation concepts. The one would come up as a planner with and integrate those ideas, and we have a riverboat.
Well, every condition is different, and probably the toughest maneuver for you would be what you're doing at the time. In other words, visibility can be a problem, landing and high winds can be a problem. It's not exactly a problem, it's something that you have to plan for and overcome. This is an adventure. It's something no one's done since they changed this river from a free-flowing river to a lake. It's pretty scenery. It's a relaxing ride. I think the riverboat as a passenger vessel or as leisure is coming into its own at this time.
Just like any other tourist business in South Dakota, we need billboards, and obviously we need more of them to let the people know that we're out here. But most of our traffic, if you will, comes from word of mouth. People heard about it, they had a good time, they'll bring a group back, or they'll come out, eat dinner or whatever, and that's where most of our business comes from.
Every cruise is interesting. I always meet fun people. I think one time I met a couple that they had left home in September of last year and they were still on vacation, and that was in June. And they didn't think they'd get home until September of this year. I thought that was kind of unusual.
Tying lines for me.
What did you have to learn about doing that sort of stuff?
How not to knot them, how not to get them tangled, how to do it quickly, anticipating which one to tie first. Otherwise, there's nothing that difficult. Checking the bilges, things we have to do. Keeping the passengers happy is probably the most important job, though.
It's hard to imagine what Missouri River travel was like 100 plus years ago. Lewis and Clark certainly had a rougher time of it then, and more uncertainty about what was around the next river bend. One thing's almost the same though, the rolling hills are still beautiful.
The area is rich in history and everything from Indian camps, forts, to riverboat wrecks, and there's a lot of local history too. And some of the passengers, that's what we ask them when they come on aboard, to help us point out some of those things which are probably more of a local significance as opposed to a state or regional significance.
Really enjoyed it because I was raised in Rosebud and lived in White River, South Dakota for 30-some years, and I found out more information about both places today than I have by living there.
You can see a large red rock that kind of sticks right up out of the earth there. Now that is called red rock or brick kiln or the brickyard, and this was a landmark in the Missouri River steamboat days, reaching nearly 700 feet above the stream at its apex 1 mile south. It is identified as brick kiln rock, while in some of the steamboat logs it is referred to as the brickyard, presumably because of the predominantly reddish coloring. In the log of the steamboat Campbell in 1863, Captain LaBarge comments that the brick kiln burned for 3 years following 12 miles back from the river. The presence of an underground coal bed may account for this phenomenon.
Well, we like the red rock.
This special voyage down the old Mizzou was a real big event for a Mitchell couple.
44 is correct. Yes. So this is sort of our present. My husband's present to me. I didn't know we were going until he came home and told me that we were going to have this little cruise. It sounded good to me because I had never been on one before. And I'm enjoying it.
Well, it was a really nice, smooth ride, enjoyable on the way down, cool with the breeze that we were going into. And have a pretty good captain. Seems to know what he's doing, so I would recommend it to anyone.
The ride on the Missouri Trader lasted 12 hours to make the run from Chamberlain to Platte and back. Breakfast, lunch, and T-bone steak all served at 10 miles an hour.
We really enjoyed it. See different country, now we're going back and see it the other way around. That's what I like about it.
It's just wonderful. It's just relaxing. It rides so smooth and it's so nice.
This is the way to see the country. This is really the way. Slow and relaxing, and people that go on here, everybody after a while gets to know everybody.
Because it's very interesting. There's a lot of nature. Educational. Just a great trip. Great fun, relaxing trip, I would say.
I guess just being with everybody and looking out and seeing the beautiful hills, and the boat ride is so smooth, and it's just great. Everything's just great. The food is just delicious. Everything's great.
Cruising on the Missouri River, Dave Mossner reporting for 30.
After coming ashore, we head south across the state line to Valentine, Nebraska, which is the closest community to the Fort Niobrara National Wildlife Refuge. That's where we climb into a canoe for a beautiful ride down the Niobrara.
Most of the Indians who were in this area use this more as a highway to move up and down and back and forth across it rather than establishing in it much in the way of permanent residence. There is evidence of a few semi-permanent villages in the valley, usually up on the bluffs, but those were probably also just maybe used 6 months out of the year at the most. So the Indians really were pretty nomadic in this part of Nebraska, and as a result of that, there isn't a whole lot of evidence of them, although you can find arrowheads and things of that sort. White people started coming down in here, probably in the early 1800s, mid-1800s. The first white people in here were, like most other places, trapping and hunting. I suppose the valley had its share of horse thieves that used it for hideout, but that would be later in the 1800s. The first permanent settlers were some ranchers, although really ranching was more in the sandhills than down here in the valley itself. By the mid or late 1800s, people had begun to settle in here and make a stab at farming. And from the 1880s perhaps, or 1870s, in that range, up until the Depression years of the 30s, the valley was pretty heavily populated. Small family farms were pretty typical in the valley, but the Depression wiped out a bunch of those. There was a slight resurgence of that during World War II and into the 50s, but at that time it was less the farming than perhaps cattle ranching on small scale. But then a lot of those people in the last 20 years have moved on also, and so it's relatively sparsely populated today.
Modern explorers go with the flow of the Niobrara at 4 to 7 miles an hour. Lou Christensen is one of 8 outfitters in the Valentine area that offer canoes and services to the modern explorers.
It's a fairly shallow river, which makes it a real nice river for people to canoe. Runs about, this right in here, we're about 6 to 8 inches deep. It will average about 18 inches deep. We have a lot of people who've never canoed in their whole lives come up here. First time they get in the canoe, that's the first time they've been in one. So it's an excellent river for novice. The heaviest use of the river is June and July, and August is usually pretty heavy, but less so. We're going through the first of the chutes on the river. We call them chutes. There's a very shallow rock bar up here, and the river has cut a narrow cut through that bar, which is deep. And of course the water rolls off of the shallow bar into the deep part and sets up a few waves, which is what we're hitting right here. Nothing very tough, just kind of fun. That's usually the first test for a novice canoer. The normal costs are going to be to rent a canoe, and you're going to have some kind of transportation. Either you're going to park your car at the top and canoe down and somebody brings you back, or you're going to have to park at the bottom and have somebody take you to the top and put you in. Basically, one canoe for one day with the minimum transportation will run in the neighborhood of $25.
15,000 to 20,000 canoeists a year from 7 states make the trip to Valentine, spending about $165 a day, a nice boost to Valentine's Main Street. The director of the town's Economic Development Committee, William Quigley, says the canoeists are important.
Our community is primarily a ranching community. We have Valentine is an excellent trade center, and it serves approximately a 100-mile radius. And so anytime we can get any kind of industry, like the tourism industry, bringing in $2 to $3 million more, it is quite a notable impact on our community.
This river is entirely spring-fed. It does not originate in the mountains, and it has no snow melt over the summer to make it go. It's all entirely spring-fed. Most of it fed out of the sandhills of Nebraska, under which lies the Ogallala Aquifer, which is one of the largest underground.
The canoe run starts for most canoeists in the Fort Niobrara Wildlife Refuge. In most places, the tree-lined river looks much like it did years ago. Even with 20,000 canoeists a year, most of them visiting during June and July, Christensen says there aren't any canoe jams.
On our busiest Saturdays up here, we may run 500 canoes, and there may be a few more. And that's a lot of canoes, and most of them will put in between 9 and 11 o'clock on Saturday morning. So you probably will canoe Saturday with canoes around you in sight all the time. You're not shore-to-shore canoes, and you're not bumper-to-bumper. 500 canoes stretched out over this stretch of river is not crowded. During the week is usually the best, yes, because there will be some canoes on almost every day of the week, but the odds of you actually seeing them are pretty slim. There's a myriad of wild flowers, both in the valley and then up in the sandhills. That's one thing that surprised me when we moved up here, was the number of flowers that bloomed all summer long. There's always flowers. One of the things that a lot of people up here have fun doing is watching birds as they go down the river. We get some people up here really pretty excited.
Bird is the big one up there.
I was looking at that. I can't tell whether it's a turkey vulture. I think that's what it is. Get a little closer, we might be able to see it. There are a lot of turkey vultures up here. We have eagles up here too, although that didn't look like one. Other birds of prey. We have the red-tailed hawk, of course, and a rough-legged hawk. And then we have some of the smaller ones too, which are a little less commonly known by the general public. And then small songbirds by the hundreds.
A must-stop for canoeists is Smith Falls, the highest falls in Nebraska. Smith's isn't the only waterfall. It seems you pass one every 10 yards.
Most people who are new canoers will canoe a stretch of the river that is pretty easy to handle. And after they have canoed the upper stretch here for 2 or 3 hours, they've got a pretty good handle on what makes a canoe go, and generally are ready for any of the lower stretches that might be a little bit trickier. We're starting through a series of these rock shelves with a cut down the center of them, or down through them, and the cut is where the whitewater is. It rolls off the shelf into the cut and sets up these waves, which is the Niobrara whitewater. The whitewater we have on this river, most of it is because there's a hard pan bottom close to the surface of the water, and the water over the years has cut a channel through that hard pan, and then the water comes off of the shelf into the deeper cut and sets up some standing waves, some rough water, and that for the most part is what whitewater is on the Niobrara. It's kind of bouncy, kind of fun, not real dangerous. What we're coming up on now is called the chute, and it's another one of those rock shelves. Off to the right or the left side of the canoe you can see the ripply water, which indicates that it's real shallow right in there. We're going down the cut, which starts right about in here where we're at and culminates in the whitewater that you see downstream. Those are actually below the rock shelf, and they're more like standing waves that have been created by the water coming into the chute and then shooting out at the bottom, and so we get a nice stand of waves in here.
Each nook and cranny of the Niobrara has a name, like Smith Falls or Fritz's Island.
We're coming up on Fritz's Island here. It's called Fritz's Island because there's an old man that lives near it, Fritz Brandenburg, who's 96 years old. If you have concerns about taking the whitewater, you can take the left channel, which makes an easy trip down and around. I see another blue heron. But we're going right through the heavy stuff today. Now we will head down here just to the right of center, and you'll begin to see some whitewater bouncing down there at the bottom, and we will try to aim right for that. Here we go. Island and the rapids there.
One part of the Niobrara River we didn't take our camera gear through is this. It's called Curie's Rapids. It's really a water roller coaster, and as you can see, I didn't come out of it unsoaked. Then there are the places you can't get a canoe through. You have to portage on land, unless you have an inner tube. The tubing, chutes, and the placid parts of the Niobrara that make it one of the best in the country can be started or stopped anytime and traveled in a few hours, one day, or several days. On the Niobrara River, I'm Dave Mossner reporting 430.
I enjoyed canoeing the Niobrara so much we did it again a few weeks later as a family. Thanks for watching Riding the Rivers edition of Vintage Video. I'm David Mossner. See you next time.